The subject of this week's Koine Corner comes to us from my cousin Glenville. After Word of the Week number 106, Ways to See in the Bible, which talked about the verb blepo, I see, and the verb horao, I see, Glenn pointed out to me that perhaps the story of Thomas and Jesus after the resurrection is relevant to those words. And he is correct. The word horao makes multiple appearances in the story of what we call Doubting Thomas. So today we're going to take a look at that. And near the end, we're going to cover some controversial material. We're going to talk about something that's almost an indisputable fact that some of you will not be terribly comfortable with. Others will embrace wholeheartedly. But the only way you'll get to know what that is if you make it to the end of the video. So this happens in John chapter 20, the story of, quote, Doubting Thomas. And John chapter 20 begins with the resurrection of Jesus, is followed by an appearance to Mary Magdalene. Then Jesus appears to a group of his disciples who are meeting in a locked room, and it says in the story, for fear of the Jews. Then we get the encounter of the disciples with Thomas, and then Jesus with Thomas again. Much of what we're looking at today focuses on the tenses and moods of the verbs in the narrative, because much of the significance of what's happening is seen in the choices of tenses and moods in this story. So let's start out. We're in John chapter 20, and here's verse 24 from the ESV. Now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So this refers back to the time when Jesus appeared in the locked room to some of the disciples. We're told that Thomas was not present for that event. And now let's take a look at what it says at the end of that verse. Hote elthein Jesus, when Jesus came. So I want to focus on this verb, elthen. This comes from erkomai, and this is the aorist active indicative, third person singular. He came. So hote, when he came. Who came? Jesus, Jesus. When Jesus came. So the aorist tense just gives us the simple past in the indicative mood, which is the mood of sort of describing fact or reality. When Jesus came is a simple past event. They're talking not about the significance of his coming, but just the historical reality that he came. Thomas wasn't there when Jesus came. This is not terribly important. It only serves to illustrate the tense and mood of the aorist in the indicative. And that's going to change when we go on now and look at verse 25a, the first part of verse 25. So the other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. So let's dig into what they told him. Heorakamen ton kurion. So heorakamen comes from horao, I see, but here this is in the perfect tense, active voice, indicative mood, first person plural. We have seen. Have seen what? Ton kurion, the Lord. In the accusative case, the case of the direct object. So we have seen the Lord. Notice below that I have eidomen ton kurion. This is if it would have been in the aorist active indicative first person plural. We saw the Lord. If they were to have said eidomen ton kurion, we saw the Lord, it would only be describing the historical reality of the event, not the consequences or significance of the event. But here we shifted the tense to the perfect tense, heorakamen ton kurion, we have seen the Lord. By using the perfect tense and not the aorist tense, the emphasis is on the consequence of having seen the Lord. What is the consequence? They were meeting behind locked doors, they were grieving, they were afraid, they had lost hope, but now they come and say, we have seen the Lord. Who is this Lord? The risen Christ. The people whose hopes had been dashed, who were living in fear, who couldn't make sense of the last 3.5 years of their lives, now have a renewed hope, a renewed confidence, a renewed faith. Their grief is less, they have less fear, and they go and share with one of their brethren who wasn't there. We have seen the Lord. Heorokamen ton kurion. So think about this if you're Thomas. They have just made an extraordinary claim, right? The claim is extraordinary, and there's an axiom. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. So the tense that they chose, the perfect tense, heorokamen, we have seen, ton kurion, the Lord, is part of this extraordinary claim. We are changed. We have had an experience that is profound. The Lord that we saw die and that we took to the tomb, we have seen him again, and he is alive, right? Not alive, alive. It's remarkable, extraordinary, and that extraordinary claim brings us to Thomas's response. This is 25b. But he said to them, unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe. So, before we jump on Thomas, not an unreasonable thing to say, because they've made an extraordinary claim, right? We would take the claim of someone's resurrection as extraordinary on its face. Now, the ESV has been kind in their translation here. Let me rephrase that. They've been gentle in their phrasing here, in their translation. It's respectful. But I think they're missing the mark in that regard, because Thomas makes a very bold proclamation, and he does so by changing the mood of the verbs, and he makes a very, very pointed statement to his fellows. Let's look at it. Aeon me ido, which means aeon me is if not, and if not, or unless. So except or unless, ido, here we get horao, I see, but here it's present active subjunctive mood, the mood of the hypothetical, of possibilities and probabilities. So here from horao, unless I should see, unless I might see, entais kersen autu, in his hands, ton tupon ton halon, the mark of the nails. Unless I should see the mark of the nails. So this introduces a third-class condition, a hypothetical, right? So you guys have come and made an extraordinary claim, and my response to your extraordinary claim is a demand for extraordinary results. Whoever you saw, if I were to see him, unless I see the mark of the nails, because I saw him crucified, unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands, then we go on and read the rest of the verse. Kaibalo, and this is also in the subjunctive, and unless I should cast, balo is cast or throw, unless I should cast ton daktalon mu, my finger, ace ton tupon ton halon, into the mark of the nails. So he says, unless I should see the mark of the nails in his hands, unless I should cast my finger into the mark of the nails, then the rest of it, kaibalo mu te kera, unless I should cast my hand, throw my hand, eistain pleran autu, into his side. Look at the word pluran. You've heard of pleurisy, the an infection in the chest cavity where your lungs are, the pleural space, unless I should cast my hand into his side, ume pistuso, I should or I shall in no way believe. We have a double negative for pistuso. Pistuso is fascinating because it's the exact same form for the future active indicative as for the present active subjunctive. So it's either I shall believe or I should believe. With the double negative, either way it means the same thing. I shall in no way believe. So what does he say? They come along and say, hey, Orakamen ton kurion, we have seen the Lord. And he says to them, unless I should see the mark of the nails in his hands, unless I should also cast my finger into the mark from the nails, and unless I should cast my hand into his side, I shall in no way believe. There's no way that you can convince me of what you've said unless I personally get tactile, empirical evidence that this is the same Jesus that I saw crucified and stabbed in the side with a spear and buried in a tomb. I saw him die. For me to believe that you have seen him, I'm going to have to see the marks from the nails, cast a finger into the marks from the nails, cast my hand into the side that was pierced with the spear, and then and only then will I believe. Without that degree of evidence, I shall in no way believe. Pretty extraordinary, right? But not unreasonable, because extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Let's press on and read verses 26 and 27. 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them this time. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you," the common greeting, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and put out your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." Again, here, the ESV is gentle with the language. The translation is gentle and not as aggressive as the Koine would communicate. Now, the words of Jesus here are magnificent, and they mark an important shift. So, in Thomas's statement, his description of the conditions that it would take in order for him to believe, we had verbs in the subjunctive mood. Unless I should see, unless I should cast my finger, unless I should cast my hand, I should in no way believe. These are in the subjunctive, perhaps in the future with believe, right? We talked about that. Here, Jesus' response leaves the subjunctive aside and goes into the imperative mood, the mood of commands. Let us take a look. Fere ton dactylon su ohode. So fere, from Pharaoh, this is the imperative in the second person singular. Bring ton dactylon su ohode. Bring your finger here. He said, unless I cast my finger. Jesus says, bring your finger here. Carry your finger over here. Kai ide tas keras mu. And behold my hands. So ide from horao, this is the second person imperative singular, pardon me, the second person imperative. Bring your finger here. Behold my hands. You wanted to see the marks from the nails? Take a look. Now we go to the next part. Kai fere tain kerasu, and bring your hand. Kai bale eis tain pluron mu, and cast it into my side. So remember, that's what he said. Unless I examine the marks, unless I see the marks from the nails, cast a finger into the marks from the nails, cast my hand into his side. So Jesus says, Bring your finger over here, and behold, cast your finger into the, bring your hand over here and cast it into my side. And then we get this great part at the end, kai me ginu apistos ala pistos. Kai me ginu. So ginu is from ginomai. It's the imperative. And be not apistos, unfaithful or unbelieving, Allah, rather, pistos, believing. So come over here and do the things that you said you needed to do to have the requisite evidence. And then, after you've done those things, don't be an unbeliever, rather be a believer. Believe rather than disbelieve after you have the evidence that you have demanded. So notice that Jesus has exactly fulfilled the demands that Thomas made. Thomas says, there's no way I could believe this unless these conditions were met. And Jesus says, come meet those conditions. Bring your finger over here. Bring your hand over here. Behold the marks. Stick your hand in here. Stick your finger where you think you need to stick it. And when you've done that, stop being an unbeliever, rather be a believer. Spectacular, magnificent stuff. Thomas, let's take a look at what happens next, 28 and 29. Thomas answered him, my Lord and my God. And Jesus said to him, have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. Let's look at what Jesus says to Thomas here. Hote heorakas me. Then we get the last part, pepistiukos. So here we have two verbs in the perfect tense. Let's start with the last one. Pepistiukos. This is a question, so I'm phrasing it as a question. Have you believed, hoti, because, heorakos, you have seen me. Have you believed because you have seen me? Remember what the disciples said to Thomas? Heorakamen ton kurion. We have seen the Lord. Now listen to this. Hoti heorakas. Because you have seen me, have you believed? Pepistiukos? That's a tongue twister. Pepistiukos. We have the reduplication and then the inserted kappa before the connecting vowel. Pepistiukos. Have you believed because you have seen me? Spectacular. Now look at the last part. Makarioi, blessed, hoi me idontas, are the ones who have not seen. This is a participle in the aorist tense from horao. Blessed are the ones who have not seen, kai pistiusantes. This is also a participle in the aorist tense, the ones who have not seen. So blessed are the ones who have not seen and who have believed. So he says to him, have you believed because you have seen? Your conditions were met and now you believe. You make the big declaration, my Lord and my God. The real blessed ones are the ones who have not seen and who have believed. Here comes the controversy. I referenced at the beginning that there would be a controversy. So this magnificent story is only recorded in John's Gospel. Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't tell it. And if we think about this for a moment, as it has a function in the narrative, it's quite spectacular. So who is our writer here? It's John. Which John? John the Baptist? No, John the Evangelist. Called the Evangelist because he writes this gospel and lives out his life converting people to Christianity. John the Baptist loses his head and has a short career in leading people toward Jesus, whereas John the Evangelist lives to be an old man and lives out his life pointing people toward Jesus. What does he do here as a writer that is so magnificent? The people who read this story about doubting Thomas have read about 95% of John's gospel by the time they get here. And some of them are saying these claims about this Jesus are extraordinary. And it would be difficult for me to believe extraordinary claims without extraordinary evidence. And then John comes along and utilizes, and I'm not saying it didn't happen for those of you who are cursing my name and writing me a nastygram right now. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm saying John tells the story of someone of like mind and spirit to those who would say, these claims are extraordinary. I need an extraordinary evidence. Thomas says to the claim of heorakamon ton kurion, we have seen the Lord, I'm going to need extraordinary evidence. And he lays out his extraordinary evidence. And the next thing you know, Jesus appears and provides him. Notice it never says that Thomas cast a finger into his hands or that he cast his hand into his side, but Jesus offers up the extraordinary evidence. A piece of the extraordinary evidence is that Jesus knows what Thomas's demand was without having been there. And then Jesus tells the newly convinced Thomas, blessed are the ones who have not seen what you have seen, but have believed. As a writer, as an evangelist, John gives us this story as a soothing to doubt. Are you saying it's difficult for me to believe? I'm touched, I'm moved, I want to believe, but these claims are extraordinary? Then Jesus comes along and says, blessed are the ones who have not seen, but have believed. And how can we know that there's truth to this notion? Pardon me while my chihuahua barks at the mailman. How can we know that, that John is using this as a literary device? Not saying it's not true, not saying it didn't happen, but how can we know that it's a literary device to bring the doubters over the finish line? We can know it by the next two verses. Look at verses 30 and 31. Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written. These what? These events that have been recorded in the book, so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. So John the Evangelist, after the story of doubting Thomas, says if you're like Thomas and you feel like you need more evidence, you're not going to get the opportunity to behold the marks in his hands, to cast a finger into the marks in his hands, or to cast your hand into his side. That's not going to happen. The evidence that you're going to have is what's been written in this book. You've read 95% of it thus far. And what John the Evangelist says, hot on the heels of Jesus saying, blessed are those who have not seen but have believed, is the evidence that you have to examine is the evidence that I've given you in this book. Take that evidence and be blessed. Believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and have faith. That's what John the Evangelist does as a brilliant communicator and as a successful evangelist. He anticipates their doubt. I know what I'm saying to you in this book is extraordinary. I just wrote to you about someone rising from the dead. And now he says, it's okay for you to believe based on the evidence that you have. You're in good company with one of the disciples handpicked by Jesus who had doubts. His doubts were overcome, and he was told, you believe because you have seen, but it's better, it's more blessed to believe having not seen what Thomas has seen. Pretty spectacular stuff. Glenville, horao appears in heorakamon and several other instances through the story. It's integral, and if we look at the choices of tenses and moods and how the narrative unfolds, it brings John's readers to the conclusion that it's okay to believe and it's okay to accept his written evidence as the best evidence we're going to get. Blessed are those who have not seen with their finger or their hand, but who have seen through the storytelling of the eyewitness, John the Apostle, who is the evangelist, and who have thus believed. Great story, great stuff. Hope it was good for you. If so, you know what to do. And until next time, Charis Kai Irene Humin, grace and peace to you.